A new school can be a lot to handle, especially when you're the one who's just arrived. For the girl, it felt like the entire world was watching her every move. She had moved to the town a week ago, and while she was hopeful that things would get better, it seemed like her new classmates had other ideas. The first day at school was a blur of unfamiliar faces and strange surroundings. She tried to smile, but it didn't come easy. She had always been the quiet type, someone who preferred to listen more than speak. But today was different. Today she had to be more than just a quiet girl. She had to be strong. She sat in the back of the classroom, keeping her head down, hoping that no one would notice her. She was the only black girl in the class, and although she tried to ignore it, she could feel the stares. Some of the students whispered to each other, their eyes drifting toward her. She didn't know what they were saying, but she could tell they were talking about her. She wished more than anything that she could just disappear into the wall. Lunchtime came and she made her way to the cafeteria, unsure of where to sit. The tables were crowded, and she noticed that most of the kids had already grouped up with their friends. She stood by the door for a moment, scanning the room, looking for a spot where she could quietly sit and eat her lunch. But every empty seat seemed to be at a table full of kids who were laughing and talking, clearly with their own little groups. She hesitated. One of the girls sitting at a table near the back shot her a quick glance. The look was subtle, but it didn't escape the girl's notice. It was the kind of look that said, "You don't belong here." The girl tried to shake it off, but the feeling of isolation was hard to ignore. She grabbed her tray and walked to the corner of the room, where there was a small table just big enough for one person. She sat down, not making eye contact with anyone, hoping to be left alone. The cafeteria was loud, but her mind was even louder, filled with a mixture of frustration and anxiety. She had always been the shy one, the girl who didn't easily fit into any group, and this was no different. As she opened her lunch and began to eat, she could feel the eyes on her again. She was used to it by now. It wasn't the first time she had been the new girl. She had moved a lot when she was younger, so she knew what it felt like to be an outsider. But this time was different. It wasn't just the feeling of being new. It was the fact that she was the only black girl in the room, and that seemed to draw even more attention. She tried not to think about it. She tried to focus on her food, but it was hard to block out the whispers. A group of kids near her table started laughing, their voices louder than the others in the cafeteria. She caught a few words, something about her being weird or stuck up, and she felt her stomach twist. But before she could dwell on it for too long, she heard a loud voice. "Hey, new girl, what's with the silent treatment? You too good for us or something?" The girl's heart sank. She had been hoping to go unnoticed, to blend in with the crowd, but now that hope was slipping away. The voice came from a group of students who were sitting just a few tables away. She recognized them. They were the ones who had been staring at her earlier. A boy with a cocky smirk leaned back in his chair, looking directly at her. "Yeah, you don't look like you belong here," one of the girls in the group added. Her tone was sharp, and the laughter that followed made the girl's cheeks burn with embarrassment. The girl didn't say anything. She had learned over the years that responding to taunts only made things worse. Instead, she just looked down at her tray, pretending she hadn't heard them. But the whispers didn't stop. "You're not even from around here, are you?" another kid asked, a little too loudly. She didn't respond. She just focused on her food, willing herself to disappear. "You must be one of those kids who thinks they're better than us," the girl continued. "Like, what's your deal?" The girl felt her hands start to shake. The teasing had started, and there was no way to avoid it now. She wasn't surprised. This always happened when she moved to a new school. She had learned to deal with the stares, the whispers, the jokes, but it didn't make it any easier. It never did. For the rest of lunch, the bullies kept up the chatter, throwing snide comments and insults in her direction. She didn't react, but inside she felt small and alone. Why did it always have to be like this? Why couldn't she just be left in peace? Finally, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. The girl stood up quickly, eager to leave the cafeteria and get to her next class. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew that if she kept her head down, the teasing would stop eventually. It always did. As she walked out of the cafeteria, she couldn't help but feel a little defeated. It wasn't just the bullies who made her feel like she didn't belong. It was the fact that she felt different in a way she couldn't change. She couldn't help that she was black. She couldn't change the fact that her family had moved here because her mother had found a better job. She didn't choose to be the new kid. It wasn't fair, but she had to keep going. She had no choice. When she reached her next class, she was greeted by a quiet murmur of whispers. Some of the students looked at her curiously, while others avoided eye contact, unsure of how to act around the new girl. She chose an empty seat in the back, hoping no one would approach her. The last thing she wanted was more attention. For the next few days, the pattern continued. Every time she entered a room, she felt the weight of the stairs on her. Every time she tried to sit down at lunch, she was met with awkward silence or worse, whispers about her. It was exhausting. She missed the old school, the one where she had a few friends, where she wasn't constantly under a microscope. But as much as it hurt, she tried to remind herself that things would get better. They had to. Still, the thought of walking into the cafeteria every day knowing she'd be the target of mockery made her stomach twist. She just wanted to fit in, but every time she tried, it felt like the universe had other plans. Maybe she wasn't meant to belong here. She didn't know it yet, but the bullies who had singled her out were about to learn a lesson they never saw coming. They had no idea who they were messing with. The days passed, and the girl tried her best to adjust to the new school, but it wasn't easy. Every time she walked down the hallway, she felt eyes following her, whispers behind her back. It was as if she was under a constant spotlight, and every move she made was being judged. But the hardest part was lunch. Every day it was the same routine. She would grab her tray, walk to the cafeteria, and look for a spot to sit. At first, she tried to sit in the middle of the room, hoping to blend in. But the stares from the other kids were too much to ignore, and she quickly retreated to the corner where she could eat alone. It was quieter there, at least. But it wasn't peaceful. The loneliness hung in the air like a thick fog, and she felt it with every bite of food. It didn't help that there were a group of kids, mostly the same ones who had mocked her the first day, who made it their mission to make her feel uncomfortable. The boy who had started the teasing was always the loudest, sitting with a group of friends who laughed at every comment he made. He would talk about her as if she wasn't there, making jokes about her clothes or how she always sat by herself. Every word was like a needle, and the more they spoke, the deeper it felt. One afternoon, as she sat at her usual table, trying her best to ignore the noise, she saw them again, the same group of kids. They were sitting a few tables away, talking among themselves and casting glances her way. She tried not to look up, but it was hard to pretend like they didn't exist. Their laughter was getting louder, and she could feel her face growing warm with embarrassment. Then one of them, another girl from the group, shouted across the room, her voice cutting through the noise. "Hey, why do you always sit by yourself? Are you too good for everyone?" The words echoed in the cafeteria, and all eyes turned toward her. She could feel the weight of every stare pressing down on her. It was as if everyone was watching, waiting for her to react. The girl didn't respond. She just kept her head down, pretending not to hear. She knew that reacting would only make things worse. If she ignored them, maybe they would eventually get bored and leave her alone. But the taunts didn't stop. They just kept coming, one after the other, louder and more aggressive. "What's wrong with you, huh? You think you're special or something?" The voice came again, this time from the boy who had been the first to tease her. He was leaning back in his chair, grinning like he had won some kind of prize. "You really think you can just show up here and act like you're better than us? You don't even belong here." Her hands were trembling now. She couldn't understand why they were picking on her. What had she done to deserve this? She hadn't asked to be the new girl. She hadn't wanted to stand out. But that's exactly what they were forcing her to do. They were making her feel like an outsider, like she was invisible to everyone except for them. She could feel the anger building up inside her, but she pushed it down. She had learned a long time ago that letting people get to you only gave them power. If she gave in now, they would never stop. The best thing she could do was stay calm. It wasn't easy, but she had no other choice. The group continued to laugh, throwing insults her way. "What's the matter? Too scared to talk? Or are you just too proud to join the rest of us?" The girl stayed silent. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to react, but she didn't give them the satisfaction. Finally, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. The girl stood up quickly, grabbing her tray and rushing toward the exit. She didn't want to be around them any longer. She didn't want to hear their voices, their mocking laughter. But as she walked toward the door, she heard someone call out her name. "Hey, are you really just going to run away every time we talk to you?" It was the boy again, his voice sharp and full of challenge. He sounded like he was daring her to stand up for herself. He thought she was weak, that she wouldn't fight back. He didn't know who he was dealing with. The girl stopped in her tracks, her hand gripping her tray tightly. She could feel her heart racing. It was as if something inside her was telling her that now was the time to stop running, to stop hiding. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she couldn't let him think he could push her around forever. Turning around slowly, she faced the group. The boy was smirking, clearly enjoying the attention he was getting. The other kids at the table were watching with interest, some of them whispering to each other. The girl stood there for a moment, her mind racing. She knew what they expected from her. They wanted her to be scared. They wanted her to back down, but she wasn't going to give them that. Not today. For the first time, she looked him directly in the eye. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You don't know who I am or what I'm capable of. So stop talking like you do." The boy's smirk faltered for a moment and the group went quiet. They hadn't expected her to respond like that. They hadn't expected her to stand up to them. For a second, it was as if the whole room had frozen, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. But instead of backing down, the girl stood her ground. She wasn't going to let them control her anymore. She didn't owe them anything. And she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The boy opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, the bell rang again, signaling the start of the next class. The group dispersed and the girl quickly walked away, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had stood up for herself. As she walked to her next class, she felt a small sense of pride. It wasn't much, but it was something. For the first time in days, she felt like she had taken control of the situation. She didn't know if the bullies would stop bothering her, but at least now they knew she wasn't someone they could easily push around. The rest of the day passed in a blur, and by the time the final bell rang, the girl was exhausted. But there was something different in her step as she left the school. She wasn't the same girl who had walked in that morning. She had faced her fears and stood up to the bullies. And that in itself was a victory. The next few days were tense. The girl had taken a stand, but she wasn't sure if it had made any difference. She kept her head down in class, staying to herself, and hoped that the bullies would finally leave her alone. But deep down she was worried that the teasing would only get worse. After all, it wasn't the first time she had spoken up, but usually speaking up just led to more problems. This time, though, there was something different in the air. The group of bullies who had once made her life miserable seemed to be keeping their distance. At first, she wasn't sure if it was just a coincidence or if they were trying to figure out how to respond to her. But day by day, their teasing grew quieter. There were still moments when she'd catch them whispering, but it wasn't as loud or as harsh as before. It was almost like they were uncertain about how to act around her now. At lunch, she continued to sit at the same corner table, mostly eating alone. But she noticed that every so often a few other kids from her class would glance at her from across the room. They didn't stare like the bullies did, but they did seem curious, almost as if they were trying to figure out who she really was. One day, after several quiet days of just getting through her routine, something unexpected happened. As she was finishing her lunch, she looked up and saw one of the girls from the bully group approaching her. The girl had been the loudest one the day they had taunted her, the one who had made the cruelest remarks. But today she wasn't laughing. She wasn't smirking. Instead, she seemed almost nervous. The girl stopped in front of her table and hesitated. The girl wasn't sure how to react at first. She had never imagined the bullies would approach her like this. Was it a trick? Was this another attempt to make fun of her? To humiliate her again? "Can I sit here?" the girl asked, her voice a bit quieter than usual. For a moment, the girl didn't know what to say. She looked up from her lunch, surprised, and met the other girl's eyes. She had no idea what to expect. This girl, the one who had been so mean just days ago, was now standing in front of her asking if she could sit with her. It was a lot to process in such a short time. Sure," she said cautiously, unsure of what this was all about. The other girl smiled faintly, sitting down across from her. They didn't speak for a while. The silence between them was awkward. The girl couldn't help but wonder what had made her come over, why she had chosen to approach her now after everything that had happened. Was this some sort of apology, or was it just another way to make her uncomfortable? Finally, the other girl broke the silence. "Look, I want to apologize," she said, her words coming out slowly, almost as if she wasn't sure how to say them. The girl blinked, confused. "Apologize? After everything? She had never expected this. I don't know what I was thinking. The girl continued, staring at her lap. I was just being a jerk. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. I've been thinking about it and I know I crossed the line. The girl was taken aback. She had never heard those words from a bully before. She wasn't sure if she should accept the apology or if it was just some sort of trick. After all, she had been hurt by the teasing for days, and now this. It felt like a lot to process. I'm sorry too, the girl finally said, her voice quiet. I didn't want things to be like this. I didn't want to fight with anyone. I just wanted to get through the day without causing trouble. The other girl nodded, looking down at her hands. For a moment, they both just sat there sharing an unspoken understanding. Neither of them had expected things to unfold like this, and neither knew where things would go from here. The silence between them lingered a little longer, but there was something different in the air now. It wasn't the tension that had filled their conversations before, the feeling of being on edge and ready for the next insult. This time it was quiet, calm, even peaceful. The girl felt something shift inside of her, something she hadn't expected. She realized that, in that moment, it wasn't about whether the other girl had apologized or not. It was about what she had done for herself. She had stood up to the bullies. She had faced them and refused to let them break her. Do you want to sit with me tomorrow? The other girl asked softly, looking up with a shy smile. The girl smiled back. She wasn't sure if this was the beginning of a real friendship, but she appreciated the gesture. I think that would be nice, she said. From that day on, the girl began to notice changes. The teasing was still there, but it wasn't as frequent. The other kids, including the ones who had once mocked her, started treating her with a little more respect. They had seen something in her that they hadn't noticed before. She wasn't just the new girl who didn't fit in. She was someone who had stood up for herself, someone who wasn't afraid to face the challenges they threw her way. It didn't mean the bullying had stopped completely, but it was different now. The whispers had died down, the jokes became less frequent, and the tension that had once hung in the air was no longer so thick. The girl felt stronger than she had ever felt before. She had faced the bullies head-on, without backing down, and now she walked through the halls with her head held a little higher. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had earned her place not by fitting in or following the crowd, but by staying true to herself, and then a week later, something even more surprising happened. The group of bullies, the ones who had made her life miserable for so long, approached her again. This time there was no laughter, no mocking tones. Instead, they stood there silent, looking at her with something that almost resembled respect. The leader of the group, the boy who had once been the most vocal in his teasing, stepped forward. We just wanted to say, we're sorry, he said. His voice was quieter than usual, almost apologetic. The girl was stunned. It wasn't the apology she had been expecting, but it was still an apology. She looked at the boy, at the group standing behind him, and realized something. They weren't perfect, and maybe they hadn't changed completely, but in that moment, they had recognized something in her, something they hadn't seen before. Thank you, the girl said, her voice steady. It wasn't the perfect resolution. It wasn't the fairy tale ending where everyone suddenly became friends. But it was enough. For the first time since she had arrived at this school, the girl felt like she had found her place, and it wasn't by conforming to anyone's expectations. It was by standing tall, by showing who she was, and by refusing to let anyone make her feel small. She had done it. And in that moment she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would always be strong enough to face them. The days that followed brought a sense of calm that the girl had felt since she arrived at the new school. The teasing had lessened, but she couldn't say it was entirely gone. The group of kids who had made her life miserable still whispered about her in the hallways, and sometimes even glanced her way with a look that seemed more curious than mean. But it wasn't the same as before. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just with them. It was with her too. Each day she walked through the school with more confidence. Her posture was a little straighter, her steps a little firmer. She didn't try to hide anymore, and although she didn't expect everyone to suddenly become her best friend, she felt like she was carving out her own place in the school, one day at a time. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. Lunch was still the hardest part of the day. It wasn't just about eating. It was about where she would sit, who she would sit with, and whether or not she would feel the weight of isolation all over again. She had tried sitting at different tables, but it never felt quite right. She didn't know anyone well enough to feel comfortable, and the quiet loneliness always seemed to catch up with her, no matter where she sat. One day, while she was walking into the cafeteria, she saw a familiar face sitting alone at a table near the back. It was the girl who had sat with her the day after the confrontation with the bullies. At first, the girl hadn't known what to expect, but now, seeing her again, the girl felt a small sense of relief. The girl wasn't like the others. She hadn't made fun of her or teased her, and there was something kind about the way she had approached her after everything had happened. With a deep breath, the girl walked over to the table, hesitating for a moment before sitting down across from her. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but steady. The other girl looked up, surprised, but smiled warmly. "Hey, I didn't expect you to come over today." The girl smiled back, feeling a little less nervous than she had before. "I thought it would be nice to sit with you," she said, her voice more confident than it had been in the past. The two of them settled into a comfortable silence, each of them eating their lunch. It wasn't much, but for the girl it felt like a small victory. She wasn't alone. She wasn't hiding anymore. And as she sat there with the other girl, something inside her started to change. She was beginning to see that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Over the next few weeks, their friendship grew. It wasn't anything dramatic, but it was real. The girl would sit with her during lunch, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. They laughed over small jokes, shared stories from their childhood, and gradually got to know each other more. She still didn't have a lot of friends, but having someone to talk to made all the difference. It was like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. But even with the new friendship, the girl couldn't forget the bullies. She had seen the way they looked at her in the halls, the way they whispered behind her back. They didn't openly mock her anymore, but they hadn't fully accepted her either. Sometimes when she caught one of their eyes, she could see the doubt there, the confusion. It was almost as if they were trying to figure her out, trying to understand who she really was and why she wasn't scared of them. One afternoon, as she walked to class, she saw one of the boys from the group approaching her. His usual smirk wasn't there, but instead he looked uncertain. He was standing in her path, and for a moment the girl felt her heart skip. Was this going to be another confrontation? Was he going to pick on her again? She stopped in her tracks and looked at him, waiting for him to speak. Her hand clenched around the straps of her backpack, but she didn't let the fear show. She had faced them before. She could do it again. "Hey, can we talk for a second?" he asked, his voice low. The girl didn't know what to say. She had never expected him to approach her like this, and for a moment, she wondered if she had misunderstood the situation. He wasn't laughing, wasn't throwing insults at her. He just looked tired. Sure?" she said slowly, unsure of what was going on. He looked around as if to make sure no one was watching, and then spoke again. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry," he said, "for what I did, for how I treated you before." The girl's eyes widened. She had heard apologies from others, but this one felt different. This wasn't the usual mock apology or a way to get out of trouble. There was sincerity in his voice. She didn't know what to say at first, so she just stood there, her thoughts spinning. I don't know what came over me. I guess I thought it was cool to pick on you, but I was just being stupid. And I realized it's not okay. You didn't deserve that." The girl was silent, processing his words. She didn't know if she should accept his apology right away. She had been hurt by what they had done to her, but something in his eyes told her that he meant it. This wasn't about pride or showing off in front of others. It was a real apology. After a long pause, she took a deep breath and nodded. "I appreciate that," she said quietly. "But I think it would take time for me to trust you again, and I'm not sure I can forget everything that happened." He nodded. "I get it. I don't expect you to. I just wanted to apologize. And you know, if you ever need anything, if you ever want to talk, I'm here." For a moment, they stood there, neither of them knowing what to say next. Finally, the girl gave a small, tentative smile. "Thanks." And just like that, the tension between them eased. He turned to walk away, but before he left, he glanced back over his shoulder. "See you around," he said, and this time it wasn't said with mockery or challenge. It was said with a kind of respect. The girl watched him go, still processing what had just happened. It felt strange, but in a good way. She had never expected him to apologize, especially not after everything that had happened. But here she was, standing in the hall with her heart pounding and a sense of relief slowly settling in. Things were starting to change. Maybe not all at once, but in small, quiet ways. She had faced the bullies and stood up for herself. She had earned the respect of others by staying true to who she was. And slowly, bit by bit, the walls she had built around herself began to come down. When the final bell rang that day, the girl left school with a new sense of hope. She wasn't the same person who had walked into this school a few months ago, unsure and afraid. She had learned to stand tall. She had learned that no matter how hard things got, she could face them. And most importantly, she had learned that change could happen when you least expected it, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. The girl was beginning to see that no matter what challenges came her way, she was strong enough to handle them. And that was a feeling worth holding on to. The next few weeks felt different. The girl had slowly started to believe that things were going to be okay. The bullies had stopped their taunts, the stares had lessened, and she was no longer the outsider. She wasn't sure if it was because of her own strength or if things were simply shifting in her favor. But for the first time, she could breathe easier in the halls of the school. Her life outside of school had changed too. She was getting more involved in her activities, spending time doing things she enjoyed. At home, she practiced karate every evening, perfecting her moves, testing her strength, and focusing on discipline. Karate wasn't just about self-defense for her. It was her way of feeling in control, of reminding herself that she was capable of handling whatever life threw at her. School, however, still had its moments. One day, as she was walking to her locker between classes, she overheard a group of kids talking. The conversation was light, and there was nothing unusual about it until she heard a name. The group was talking about the girl. The whispers were soft but still loud enough for her to catch. "She's changed, hasn't she?" one of the girls said, her voice almost thoughtful. Another girl answered, "I don't know. She's still quiet, but I feel like she's different now. Like she's stronger." For a moment, the girl stopped in her tracks. She didn't know if the comment was meant to be kind or if it was simply an observation. She stood there, unsure of how to react, but it didn't matter. The words were out there, and they made her think. In the past, she would have avoided listening to anything that had to do with her. But now hearing these words felt different. It was the first time anyone had said anything positive about her. Not just about her being the new girl or the quiet one, but about her being strong. The girl felt a little warmth spread through her. She wasn't sure if they were alluding to the way she had handled the bullies or something else, but whatever it was, it made her realize something. She had earned their respect. Maybe not from everyone, but from enough people that it started to matter. The teasing hadn't completely disappeared, but it was becoming less and less. And in a way, it didn't bother her as much anymore. She had learned to stand up for herself, and that in itself had made a huge difference. The next few days passed with an easy rhythm. She kept to her routine, practicing karate, working on her schoolwork, and spending time with the few friends she had started to make. One of the most unexpected things was how many people started to talk to her. After the confrontation with the bullies and the apology, some students who had never noticed her before began to smile at her in the hallways, wave to her in the cafeteria, and occasionally chat with her between classes. Still, the girl couldn't help but wonder what had really changed. Was it her, or was it everyone else around her who was starting to change? It didn't matter. What mattered was that she had survived the hard part, the part where everything seemed to be against her. She had proven that she wasn't someone to be pushed around, and that felt like a victory on its own. One day, as she sat in the cafeteria eating lunch and chatting with a few classmates, she noticed the bullies walking in. For the first time, they didn't seem to pay her any attention. They didn't glance at her, didn't make jokes behind her back, and didn't whisper. They just walked past as if she was no longer even on their radar. It was strange. It was like they had forgotten about her. But in a way, she felt relieved. It was clear they had moved on, and that was all she needed. The bullies weren't a threat to her anymore. They had tried to break her, but she had stayed strong, and in the end, they were the ones who had to change. As the weeks turned into months, the girl started to build more relationships, not just with the classmates who had shown her kindness, but with others who had once stayed on the sidelines. She didn't seek popularity or try to fit in. She simply allowed herself to be herself, and that was enough. There were still times when she felt insecure. Sometimes, walking through the crowded halls of school, she would feel that familiar pang of uncertainty, but instead of letting it consume her, she would remember what she had learned. She remembered how far she had come and how much stronger she was now. One afternoon after school, She walked into the dojo for her karate practice. As usual, her instructor was there, waiting for the class to begin. He smiled at her as she entered, his eyes gleaming with pride. "You've been doing well," he said, his tone warm but serious. "I can see your improvement. Keep going like this and you'll go far." Her heart swelled with pride. She hadn't realized just how much she had grown, not only in her skills but in her confidence. Karate had always been about more than just learning moves. It had been about discipline, focus, and learning to trust herself. And now, every practice felt like a reaffirmation of everything she had been working toward. But it wasn't just about karate anymore. It was about her whole life, how she was starting to approach each day with a stronger sense of self. Her classmates, her friends, even the people who had once taunted her, they all saw it now. They saw her as someone who didn't back down, someone who wasn't afraid to be who she was. The bullies, the ones who had once made her feel small, had moved on, but they weren't the only ones watching. She had become an example for the others, the ones who had stayed in the background, afraid to stand out, afraid to be different. Her quiet strength had resonated with them, and she realized that she had become a symbol of resilience without even trying. One day, a few months after the apology and the changes that followed, the girl walked into the cafeteria and saw one of the bullies standing by the door. The girl's heart didn't race this time. She didn't feel the familiar knots of anxiety twisting in her stomach. Instead, she felt calm. She smiled as she walked past them. The bully gave a small, almost sheepish nod in return, but there were no harsh words, no stares. They simply moved aside, letting her pass without comment. It was then that she realized something. She hadn't needed their approval to feel good about herself. The real victory was the quiet shift inside her. The bullies may have been the catalyst, but it was her own strength that had carried her through. As she walked to her usual table in the cafeteria, she couldn't help but smile. Things weren't perfect, but they were better, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged, not because of anyone else, but because of herself. The girl had learned that strength wasn't always about being loud or demanding attention. It wasn't about fighting every battle or proving something to everyone. True strength came from within. It came from standing tall when everything around you tried to push you down, from knowing who you were and not letting anyone change that. And as she sat down with her friends that day, laughing and talking, she realized that this was only the beginning. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living and doing so on her own terms. The girl had found her place, and no one could take that away from her. The girl continued to navigate her way through the school year, and while things had certainly gotten better, there were still moments that felt challenging. Every day wasn't perfect, and every interaction didn't go smoothly, but she had learned to handle the bumps in the road. She had come a long way from the girl who walked in that first day feeling unsure and out of place. Now she was someone who walked into school with her head held high, confident and proud of who she was. Still, there were times when she felt a little out of place, like when she walked into a crowded hallway and had to find her way through the sea of students. It wasn't that people were deliberately ignoring her or leaving her out. It was just that sometimes she still felt invisible. It was the kind of feeling that snuck up on her unexpectedly. One moment she could be surrounded by friends and laughter, and the next it would hit her that she wasn't quite as connected as she wanted to be. But these moments were becoming fewer and farther between. She had built a small but solid group of friends, the ones who had supported her along the way. They were the ones who saw her for who she truly was, not the quiet girl who had once been an easy target, but someone who was strong, confident, and capable of handling anything that came her way. It was on one of those days when she was walking through the hallways, feeling a little disconnected from everyone, that she noticed something interesting. A group of students who had been some of the ones who had once joined in the mocking and teasing were standing near the lockers. They weren't laughing or whispering. In fact, they were talking quietly amongst themselves, and they looked different. There was no hostility in their eyes, no laughter at her expense. Instead, they seemed thoughtful. She hadn't expected to see them like this. One of the girls who had been part of the group of bullies looked at her, but this time, there was no judgment, no cruel smirk. Instead, the girl gave her a small, uncertain smile. For a brief moment, the girl locked eyes with her, and there was no tension, no fear. It was just a simple look, as if they both understood something without needing to say anything at all. The girl smiled back, unsure of what to make of it, but feeling an unspoken recognition in the air. And just like that, things felt different. She didn't feel like she was being watched anymore. She didn't feel like she was standing out in a way that made her an outsider. For the first time, she felt like just another student walking through the halls. No more, no less. The weight that had once followed her everywhere seemed to lift, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of calm. Lunchtime had always been the most nerve-wracking part of the school day for her. She had grown used to sitting alone at her small corner table, but it wasn't something she particularly enjoyed. She longed for the kind of casual friendships that seemed to come so easily to others. There were days when she would look around the cafeteria and see groups of students laughing and talking, and she wished she could be a part of that. But that afternoon, as she walked into the cafeteria, she noticed something different. A couple of her friends waved at her from a table, inviting her over. She hadn't been expecting it, but she felt a rush of warmth in her chest. She had been so focused on her own insecurities that she had failed to notice how much she had truly changed. The girl smiled and made her way over to the table. Her friends greeted her with smiles, and they all began chatting about the usual things: homework, teachers, and their favorite TV shows. It wasn't anything special, but it was enough. It was enough to make her realize that this was what she had been waiting for all along. Not a grand, dramatic shift, but a quiet, steady feeling of belonging. She was no longer the outsider. She was part of something, and that was enough to make her feel like she had finally found her place. As the weeks went by, the girl started to notice something else: her own confidence growing. It wasn't just about standing up to the bullies or fitting in with the other students. It was about how she viewed herself. She was no longer just a quiet girl who kept to herself. She was someone who had worked hard, who had faced challenges head-on, and who had come out stronger on the other side. One afternoon after school, she went to her karate practice. The dojo was quiet, and the usual sound of students practicing their moves filled the space. But today she felt a different kind of energy in the air. It wasn't just the familiar rhythm of punches and kicks. It was the quiet focus that she had learned to bring into her everyday life. As she practiced her forms, moving through each step with precision, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Karate had always been her way of staying grounded, of keeping control over the things that felt uncertain, and now, with every movement, she felt more and more connected to the person she was becoming. Her instructor noticed the change, too. As they finished practice, he approached her and gave her a thoughtful look. "You've come a long way," he said. "You're not just stronger physically. You've found your inner strength, too. Keep that with you." His words meant more than he probably realized. She had always known that karate was about more than just learning self-defense. It was about discipline, about balance, and about finding peace within herself. And now she could see that all the hard work, all the moments of doubt had led her to this point. She had found something within herself that no one could take away. The girl's life outside of school had also changed in small but meaningful ways. She had started volunteering at a local community center, helping younger kids learn karate and build confidence. She had no idea how much it would affect her until she saw the shy, uncertain faces of the kids she worked with. She saw herself in them. She saw the same quiet strength, the same doubts, the same fears, and she realized that maybe she could help them, just as she had helped herself. Working with the kids brought her a sense of fulfillment that she hadn't expected. She didn't just teach them karate, she taught them to believe in themselves. She taught them that strength wasn't about being perfect or never making mistakes. It was about trying, failing, and getting back up. It was about being kind to yourself even when the world felt hard. Over time, the girl became a mentor to those kids, and in a way, she became a mentor to herself as well. She realized that her journey was far from over. She was still learning, still growing, and still facing challenges. But now she had the tools to face them head-on. And every time she helped someone else find their confidence, it reminded her of her own journey, of how far she had come and how much she had overcome. As the school year came to a close, the girl looked back on everything she had been through. It hadn't been an easy journey, but it had been worth it. She had started as an outsider, unsure of herself and the world around her, but now, she was someone who had found her place. She was no longer the quiet girl who hid in the corner. She was someone who walked through life with purpose, with confidence, and with the quiet strength that came from within. And as she walked through the school one last time before the summer break, she felt a sense of peace. The hallways no longer felt overwhelming. The cafeteria no longer felt like a battleground. She had found her place, and she had done it by simply being herself. And that was something no one could ever take away from her. As the summer break drew closer, the girl found herself reflecting on everything that had happened since she first stepped foot into the school. It felt like a lifetime ago when she had walked through those doors full of uncertainty and fear. Now, as the days grew warmer and the school year came to a close, she couldn't help but marvel at how much she had changed. She had grown stronger, not just physically but emotionally too. She had learned to stand tall in the face of challenges, and in doing so, she had discovered parts of herself that she didn't even know existed. The summer break was a time for her to take a breath, to step back and think about the lessons she had learned. But even as she enjoyed the break from school, she knew that the journey wasn't over. Life was full of challenges, and even though she had made it through the hardest parts, there was always room to grow. She spent time with her friends, practicing karate, and reflecting on how far she had come. But there were still moments when doubt crept in. One afternoon, as she sat in her room, she began to think about what came next. She had found her place at school, but would it last? She had learned how to stand up for herself, but how would she handle new challenges? The uncertainty still lingered, but this time it wasn't a paralyzing fear. It was the kind of uncertainty that came with growth, the kind that pushed her to think about what she wanted out of life. She had made it through her first year at the school, and the thought of next year didn't scare her as much. In fact, it was starting to feel like a new chapter was beginning. The girl knew that she had the strength to face whatever came her way. She had already faced her biggest challenge, the bullies, and she had come out stronger. But now the question was how she would continue to grow, how she would continue to push herself out of her comfort zone. The summer went by quickly, and before she knew it, the first day of the new school year arrived. She stood in front of the mirror, taking a deep breath before heading out the door. She had changed, but would the school see her differently? She didn't know what to expect, but she was ready. She wasn't the same girl who had walked into the school a year ago. This time, she was walking in with purpose. As she entered the school grounds, the familiar mix of excitement and nerves washed over her. It wasn't the same feeling of dread that she had experienced last year. This time it felt like a new opportunity, a chance to prove to herself just how far she had come. She could see her friends waiting for her by the door, and as soon as they spotted her, they waved excitedly. She smiled and waved back, her heart lifting as she walked over to them. The new school year was a fresh start, and the girl was ready to take it on. She had learned that her strength wasn't just in how she dealt with others, but in how she dealt with herself. It was easy to feel unsure, easy to feel like she wasn't enough. But every time she had overcome something, whether it was standing up to a bully or learning a new karate move, she had proved to herself that she was more than capable. As the days went by, she found herself enjoying school in ways she hadn't thought possible. She wasn't just getting through the day, she was living it. She was involved in class discussions, hanging out with her friends at lunch, and even helping others with their own struggles. It felt good to know that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. One day, as she sat in class, she overheard a conversation between two of her classmates. They were talking about the new girl who had just transferred to the school. She had heard the whispers, and her heart sank for a moment. The new girl sounded like she was going through some of the same struggles that she had faced. The girl didn't want anyone to feel the way she had, and without thinking, she got up and walked over to the new girl. "Hey," she said with a smile. "I heard you were new here. I just wanted to say, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here." The new girl looked up, startled at first, but then gave a small smile. "Thanks," she said quietly. "I'm just trying to figure everything out." The girl nodded. "I get that. I've been there. It takes time, but you'll find your way. And don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it." The new girl looked at her, her eyes softening. "That's really kind of you," she said almost shyly. "I know how it feels to be the new kid," the girl replied. "You don't have to go through it alone." From that moment on, the girl made it a point to check in with the new girl, offering support whenever she needed it. It wasn't long before the new girl became part of their small group of friends, and in a way it felt like the girl was passing on the lessons she had learned. How to stand up for yourself, how to be kind to others, and how to keep going even when things felt hard. The girl had never imagined that she would be in a position to help someone else, but now it felt natural. She had been where the new girl was, and she knew exactly how to help. It wasn't about giving advice or offering solutions. It was simply about being there, about showing kindness and understanding. And in doing so, she realized just how much she had grown. She had gone from being the one who needed help to the one who could offer it. One afternoon, the girl was walking down the hall, deep in thought, when she noticed a familiar face. It was the boy who had been one of the biggest bullies when she first arrived at the school. He was standing by his locker, looking down at the ground, and for a moment their eyes met. There was no mockery, no sneer. Instead, he looked almost uncertain. For the first time, she didn't feel the tension that had always existed between them. There was no fear, no anger. It was just a moment of understanding. She stopped for a moment, then gave him a small nod. He returned the nod, a brief acknowledgement that they had both moved on. The girl smiled to herself as she walked past. There was no need for words between them. The apology had been made, and now they could both move forward without the weight of the past hanging over them. As the school year continued, the girl found herself growing in ways she had never imagined. She wasn't just gaining confidence in herself. She was gaining confidence in her ability to help others, to make a difference. She realized that true strength wasn't about fighting battles or proving herself to others. It was about being true to who she was, and using her strength to lift others up when they needed it most. And as she sat with her friends one afternoon, talking and laughing, she couldn't help but feel grateful for everything she had been through. She had faced challenges, but she had come out the other side stronger. She had learned that the most important battle was the one within herself, the battle to accept who she was, to trust in her own strength, and to keep moving forward no matter what. The girl had found her place in the world, not by fitting in or by changing who she was, but by embracing her own journey. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. As the months passed, the girl began to see how much she had truly changed. Looking back on everything, she realized that she had grown more than she ever thought possible. It wasn't just the way others saw her now. It was the way she saw herself. She had come from a place of uncertainty, where she felt like she didn't fit in, and now she had developed a quiet confidence that no one could take away from her. But even as she stood at the edge of this new chapter in her life, she knew that growth was a continuous process. Life didn't stop changing, and neither did she. There were still moments when she doubted herself, when things didn't go the way she hoped, but now those moments didn't feel like the end of the world. They were just part of the journey. She had learned to take each challenge as it came, face it head on, and move forward with strength. It was the start of another school year, and everything felt fresh again. The summer break had given her time to rest, to recharge, and to reflect on everything she had achieved. But now that school was back in session, it was time to continue growing, to keep pushing herself in new ways. The girl felt a sense of excitement stir within her. This year, she was ready to take on even more. Her group of friends had grown stronger. They had shared so many experiences over the last year, and each one had taught her something valuable. She had learned that true friendship wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about fitting a certain mold. It was about supporting one another, being there through the tough times and celebrating the good times. And most importantly, it was about accepting each other for who they really were. One afternoon, as she walked into the cafeteria, she noticed the new girl sitting alone. Her heart went out to her. She remembered how hard it had been to be the new one, to not know anyone, to feel like you were an outsider. The girl didn't even hesitate. She walked over to the new girl and smiled warmly. "Hey, I was wondering if I could join you for lunch," she said. The new girl looked up, a little surprised but grateful. "Sure," she said shyly. "That would be nice." As they sat down, the girl felt a sense of satisfaction. She had been where the new girl was, and now she was in a position to help. They started talking about their classes, their hobbies, and everything else that came to mind. The girl could tell that the new girl was a little nervous, just like she had been. But as they spoke, the tension began to melt away. "I know how you feel," the girl said. "It can be tough when you're new. But you'll get the hang of it. I promise." The new girl smiled, her eyes lighting up just a little. "Thanks," she said. "I really appreciate it." For the first time in a while, the girl realized how much she had grown. A year ago, she would have never been this confident, this open to helping someone else. But now it felt natural. She had learned that kindness could go a long way. And sometimes just reaching out to someone could make all the difference. The next few weeks went by quickly. The girl felt like she was finally where she was supposed to be. She continued to spend time with her friends, keeping up with her schoolwork and practicing karate. Every day was an opportunity to learn something new, to challenge herself and to push herself further. There were still moments of doubt, of course, but they were no longer as powerful as they had been before. The girl had learned how to quiet those voices in her head, how to trust herself and her abilities. She wasn't perfect and she didn't have to be. She had accepted that. She didn't need everyone to like her, but she did need to like herself, and that was enough. One day, after a karate class, her instructor pulled her aside. He had a serious look on his face, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes. "You've made incredible progress," he said. "Not just in your technique, but in your mindset. You've become more than just a student of karate. You've become a leader." The girl was surprised. She had never thought of herself as a leader before. She had always been the quiet one, the one who kept to herself. But now, she realized that she had grown into someone others looked up to. She had found her voice, not just in karate, but in every aspect of her life. "I think you're ready for the next level," her instructor continued. "You've earned it." The girl felt a rush of pride. She had worked so hard for this and it was finally paying off. But more than that, she realized that it wasn't just about mastering the moves or learning new techniques. It was about the person she had become. She was strong, not just in body but in mind and spirit. She was ready for whatever came next. As the year progressed, she took on more responsibilities at school, joining clubs, helping out in different activities, and getting involved in her community. She had found a new sense of purpose. She was no longer hiding in the background trying to fit in. She was stepping forward, embracing who she was and taking control of her life. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when she questioned if she was doing the right thing. But those moments were no longer crippling. She had learned to trust her instincts, to take risks, and to learn from her mistakes. She knew that every experience, good or bad, was part of the process. One afternoon, while she was walking to class, she saw the bullies again. They were standing in the hallway, laughing together like they always had. But this time something was different. The girl didn't feel the familiar knot of fear in her stomach. She didn't feel the need to avoid them or to shrink away. Instead, she stood tall, walking past them with confidence. The bullies glanced at her as she passed, but they didn't say anything. They didn't try to mock her or make her feel small. They simply moved aside and let her walk by. For a moment, the girl stopped and looked at them. They were no longer a threat to her. They were just another part of her past, a chapter that had already closed. She smiled to herself as she walked away. She had come so far and she knew that no one could take her strength away from her. She had learned that true power didn't come from fighting others or proving herself to anyone. It came from within. It came from standing up for who she was and never backing down, no matter how tough things got. By the end of the school year, the girl felt like a different person. She wasn't the same shy, uncertain girl who had walked into the school the year before. She was stronger, more confident, and more at peace with herself. She had faced her challenges head-on and had come out on top. And she knew that no matter what life threw her way, she had the strength to handle it. As the summer break began, she took a deep breath and smiled. She had earned this time to relax, to reflect, and to enjoy the fruits of her hard work. But even as she took a break, she knew that her journey was far from over. There were more challenges ahead, more opportunities to grow, and she was ready for them, ready to face whatever came next with the strength, the confidence, and the peace she had found within herself.